Okay, back in the shed and time for a brand new project, and this one's actually come from an idea from a friend of mine, Corey, who said it'd be a great idea to build a guitar using the set of tools that you had at your disposal when you built your first one. Now, he said this a little while ago and I've had a bit of time to think about it, and I think it is an absolutely brilliant idea because it follows on from the last build where I took a pretty normal Squier Affinity Strat and completely stripped it down, zhuzhed it up, made it look beautiful and put some better electronics into it and completely changed the character and the look of the instrument. That's an ideal way for people to get into the hobby of guitar building, and I think this next build will kind of show that it's possible to make a guitar with a very limited set of tools. So the first thing I want to do is to go through the set of tools that I've got at my disposal at the moment and just have a look and see which we can and we can't use in this build. And I'm going to start with the kind of bigger bits of kit. So we've got my trusty disc sander there. I didn't have one of those. And then we'll move on to the bigger of my two bandsaws. Didn't have that. Down here in the corner we have the smaller of the bandsaws, which actually needs a little bit of work. Didn't have that either. Drill press, which I also didn't have. And under that bench you can just about make out my planer thicknesser. Didn't have one of those. And also my reciprocating sander, which you see used all the time. Didn't have one of those either. Basically all of the big machine tools that I use on a regular basis to streamline and make my guitar building quicker and more efficient, I didn't have. So I'm probably thinking that this build will make me an awful lot fitter because I'm going to have to be doing a lot more handwork. In terms of things I did have, I had a big box full of kind of everyday household DIY tools, so screwdrivers, spanners, those sorts of things. I had a jigsaw, not this one, but another jigsaw. I had a router, not this one, but another one. Both the jigsaw and the router I had at the time are now broken and long consigned to the bin, but these are the replacements. Likewise with an orbital sander, so I had a much bigger one than this, but this one is plenty big enough for the purposes we have for it. And they were all very, very useful on my first build. I had to buy a few tools as well, so I bought this fret slotting saw with a adjustable guide on it, because obviously cutting fret slots is very, very important. I didn't have any hand planes at all, so I made another purchase and got this number 6 plane because it's a kind of an ideal halfway house between a kind of a jointer and a hand plane, and this actually got a lot of use dimensioning timber down, etc. In terms of all the fancy expensive woodworking tools that you see behind me on the tool wall, I didn't have any of those things at all. The only thing I had is the sash cramps, which you can see up in the corner there, most of which I bought specifically for this build. Didn't have a pillar drill, but I did have this corded electric drill. This doesn't actually work as well as it should anymore, so I probably won't use this on the build. I'll stick where I can with my battery operated drill. I did have a lot of drill bits, so I'm not going to kind of mess around just having the set of drill bits that I used initially. I had quite a lot of stuff knocking around. But to all intents and purposes, this was the majority of the tools that I used on the first build. It is a little bit more complicated than that, but I will go into specifics as they come up as we work our way through the build. One thing I did have at my disposal back in those days, but I'm not actually going to use on this build, is a spray gun and a compressor. Previous to guitars, I've done a lot of work on cars, so I've had a compressor and a spray gun for a very long time, so when it came time to finish guitars, I just simply picked up using those. However, I would expect most people starting out wouldn't have that facility. So to keep this build kind of authentic to a beginner style build, I'm not going to use that. And instead, I'm going to use rattle cans. These are from Northwest Guitars, but other brands are available. They're relatively cheap, pretty easy to use, and as long as you get enough on, you can get a nice good finish with them. It's a little bit more work and a bit more time consuming, but I think you can get just as good a finish from these as you would out of a spray gun. Other options are available. You can use water-based dyes, readily available from Crimson's, places like that, and rub-on finishing oils, which I have used in the past. It's not a preference of mine, but you can get a decent finish from that as well. Another thing that is said to me quite often is, why don't you do a hand tool only build, as a number of other builders have done? I don't do that for a few reasons. Firstly, I can't see the point in uninventing the wheel. We have power tools. They are an everyday part of our life now, so can't see the point in not using them. Secondly, good quality hand tools are far, far more expensive than the easily available power tools. So in terms of doing it to hit a budget, just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. A good illustration of that is this set of chisels, which you could potentially say would be used in place of using a router for a lot of jobs. They cost me over £100 4 years ago. I'd hate to think what they would cost now. The set of Japanese pull saws next to them on the tool wall, they were also over £100 years ago. So I think without too much difficulty, you could get yourself a decent quality jigsaw and a router for less than one of those items would cost. So what am I going to build? Well, as is pretty standard, my first build was a Telecaster, primarily because they're a pretty easy build and the plans and everything you need to build one were very readily available. Bearing in mind we're talking kind of 2010, 2011 time. Hardware wasn't as easy to get hold of as it is now. There were a few specialist places online, but nowhere near the volume that there is now, and prices were comparably higher for the stuff back then. I'm really happy to say that they have actually come down considerably in comparison. In terms of construction, this is a pine body. The pine was harvested from an extension that we knocked down, glued up into a suitable size slab, and the body cut out of it. It's very soft wood and it's painted in black nitro, and the nitro has sunk into the grain significantly, and this guitar has had an awful lot of use. It is looking a little bit battered now, but I actually love it. It is one of my favourite guitars to play. I think there's some sentimental value in with that, but it does actually play really nicely as well. It's got a Wilkinson bridge, Tone Rider pickups, CTS pots, pretty standard setup. I will be replicating that pretty faithfully. The only thing I'll probably change is I will put humbucker in the neck position. Probably put kind of like a relatively hot path style pickup in there. This one's got a TBX control for the tone. I don't think I'll do that again. It does give it a little bit more versatility, but to be honest, I don't really use the tone pot very much. This one's got 5-way switching, which is something you can do with a little bit of jiggery pokery on the electrics. I don't think I'll do that either. I think I'll just leave it standard 3-way. There will be a few differences in the next build though, however. I will use pine for the body, but my plan is I'm actually going to double bind it and do a sunburst on it. I really like the look of those sunburst double bound tellies. I think that goes back to watching Andy Summers perform with the Police with such a guitar. The major difference, however, is going to be as regards the neck, because as we can see, this one's got a maple fretboard. I don't mind a maple fretboard, but I do prefer rosewood or a similar hardwood. This was actually a 2-piece neck, so I didn't do a 1-piece with a skunk stripe and a 1-way truss rod. I have done that on a couple of guitars, but 2-way truss rods exist. I think they're better than single action ones, so I shall be using a rosewood fretboard and a 2-way truss rod on this build. Probably Goto tuners. I might even push the boat out and get a Goto bridge as well. I'm not sure. I will see how I feel about things. But other than that, it's going to be pretty standard telly. And like I say, for materials, I've got a load of this pine. This actually came out of our roof when we did a loft conversion. So I know it's very old growth wood. It's pretty stable. And these are old style 4x2s. So they actually measure 4 inches by 2 inches. So that's a little bit thicker than I need. I need 1 3/4 inches. So we're going to have to thin this down, which is going to be a joy, to say the least, without my thicknesser. But there you go, bit of exercise for me. And then I've got this piece of maple, which was left over from the base 6 build that I did a little while ago. But it's a little bit grotty up this end of the board, but there's more than enough to get a Telecaster neck out of. So that should be good. Together with that, I need to buy in a rosewood fretboard, and then we'll have everything we need. And having made a bunch of Telecasters in the past, I have a body and a neck template. These were actually the templates that I made for the original Telecaster all those years ago. So that's one less thing for me to make. But if you were to want to follow along with this build, Telecaster plans are readily available on the internet. I downloaded a set of drawings done by Terry Downs and just used those as the basis for these templates. I've been through template making a number of times on other builds, so if you're unsure how to do it, just kind of have a look back through one of my previous builds. I'm sure you will find the details there. So that's pretty much everything we need to go through in preparation for the build. The next obvious thing for me is to start to prepare some materials for the body blank. However, I'm going to leave that till the next episode, which will be along in a few days' time. So don't forget to hit that like button if you've enjoyed this. Subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I'll see you in a few days' time. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.